Hello, hello, and welcome. This week is International Coaching Week, and in honor of that, I'm interviewing a different coach every day to celebrate the world of coaching and the positive power it can have on people's lives and careers. So if you've ever been curious about what coaching entails, what it can do for you, or how to go about choosing a coach, you're in the right place. Today, I'm joined by Nick Kettles, Master Certified Coach, Executive and Leadership Coach, Coach to Coaches, and founder of the Thresholds of the Soul Coaching. So, Nick, welcome.
Thank you, Tracy, for having me.
I've known you because you were one of my tutors when I studied to become a professional coach. And you've been my own personal coach. Well, obviously, you've coached other people, but I've been working with you on and off over the last 3 years. But what I realize is that I don't know your origin story. Can you tell us how and why did you get into coaching?
Well, I'm glad that you ask, being an ex-journalist yourself, you ask a good question that allows for both how and why, because that's important. How was really by chance, in fact. In 2004, my partner and I decided that we wanted to live in Europe, and we went about selling up and planning our adventure to live in Europe for a couple of years to raise our children in a different culture. And we arrive in France, in the place we'd chosen, and our children are enrolled in a kindergarten, and the host family that had been assigned to us, the father was a coach and a trainer. And so I'd never heard of it before. So literally the first person I'd met after taking this big leap to move to a new continent was actually English and a trainer and of coaching and a coach themselves. So I'd had no plan to be a coach. I didn't know what it was. It found me. But when I saw it, I quickly realized that it had some elements in my, I would say, my ability to form business relationships that had been missing. I had been false starting in developing my own business, and I saw a certain emotional and social intelligence and agility in this person that I think initially I was envious of, but then soon enough realized I better have some of that too. So I hired them as a coach, and then the rest is history from 2005 onwards. So
excellent. Okay, so that's quite a leap from non-coaching to coaching. So what was it that well, how would you describe coaching?
Well, I think the leap, I could say a little bit about what was happening before coaching that perhaps shows the leap and describes what coaching is as well. I was formerly a journalist. That's something you and I connected with. I had written for the Times and been a contributor to The Guardian for about 3 years at the time when I arrived in France, and perhaps thinking that was going to be my career for the long haul. And what I saw in this coach was an ability to use listening, powerful questions, articulating back what the person had said, maybe offering their insight and intuition in a way that I used the same skills as a journalist, but in a completely different way, right? I realized that I had been trained to ask questions that were designed to help me find out what I wanted to know and to listen for the answers that guided me to what I wanted to know. And they were showing me how to use exactly the same skill set, but to help people find out what they most needed to know to progress their life. And I think that's, for me, the great power of coaching, is that we hold that space for people where they can consider who I am and what is possible. In a nutshell, I think that is what coaching is. We hold a space through the use of listening, powerful questions, articulating to them what we hear, and a range of other skills and mindsets that help people answer those big questions. Who am I? And what is possible for me in my life? They're easy to say, those questions, but not necessarily easy to answer, as you know well, right?
I do. And I think one of the things that drew me to coaching was this, I always had, even in my TV days, just this deep curiosity for what makes people tick. But
Right.
listening to you, you can see that as a journalist, you would have that as well, like that deep curiosity. But you wouldn't necessarily want to put the outcome of that curiosity into helping others. And I think that is what is different about coaching. So what was it, other than kind of your your ability to listen and ask those questions. What else was it about coaching that really, I guess, resonated with you?
I think you speak to it powerfully, is that I was just always curious about what people tick, what makes people tick. And I started to develop a theme in my writing about being interested in the relationship context of certain subjects. So I ended up writing for the Guardian cash section, the Observer cash section on Sunday, which is the financial paper of the Sunday version of the Guardian. And I'm lousy with money, so I don't know how I ended up writing for the cash section, but I found a niche in writing about relationships as they related to money. So I was always fascinated in the psychology of relationships and what drives people to make decisions. And money is a great place to look at for that, because it's where we're at our most impulsive sometimes, our most conservative. So I was starting to see that that's what really, really interested me. And then I was also finding that I tended to end up liking my interviewees more than I should like them, apparently. And one key example for that was while I was writing for a journal called The Ecologist magazine, which was very famous back in the 1990s and 2010s, less so now, as a premier environmental journal. And I'd been given an assignment to interview a senior politician, a vice president of a South American country, who had come over to the UK to do a kind of promotional tour about how to protect the rainforest and why we needed to communicate to middle-class drug users why they were implicit in the destruction of the rainforest, because a gram of cocaine costs a square meter of pristine rainforest. The logic was very simple. And my editor had said, you should go and interview this person, but be aware they're kind of right of center, and this might be a smokescreen for something a little bit more nefarious. So I went, and I did have my eye on that, and the subsequent article did call that out. But when I sat down with them in their consulate or wherever it was in London, I just really liked them. They were not of my political persuasion, but I could see their humanity. I could see that they had values, that they cared, that they were trying to make a difference in their own way, even if I didn't agree with it. And I perhaps realized that in that moment, I liked them too much. I was more interested in who they were than necessarily what they were doing. So I think that told me that I needed to make a shift in my career, because I was never going to be a killer journalist. I didn't have that instinct. So
well, it's brilliant that you found something purposeful that uses all your skills and talents.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So one of my points that I want to celebrate this week is that there are many different coaches out there, and that is a wonderful thing, because there's many different types of people and many different types of coaching. But when you think about it in terms of you, if you had to explain to somebody what you did or what happens in coaching, how would you, or how do you articulate that?
Well, the first way, and thank you for the question, because I think there's a lot of misinformation or a lack of understanding of what coaching is versus mentoring or therapy, for example. So in a nutshell, I would always describe coaching in more generic terms, first of all, which is that we are interested in the transformation of self-awareness from the inside out. So by holding those questions, who are you at your most essential? What drives you? And then that secondary question from there, what is possible? And those are really, really powerful questions to hold for people. And they're not answerable in half an hour. There's something that you should explore over time. And one of the key elements of coaching is that we will hold that question, but we will invite the coachee to take action in between their sessions in order to execute upon what they've learned, the self-awareness that they have generated. So it always make clear that that's the overarching theme and intention of coaching. But how I would describe what I do uniquely to me is I like to say that I help people establish a new relationship with gravity. So that's either that currently their gravity is pulling them down too much, they're too in the weeds, they need to be lifted up, or that they have found some level of buoyancy in their life, but suddenly circumstances that are outside of their control, the death of a loved one, some other circumstance that was not predicted, seems to pull them back down. So I help them reestablish a more equitable relationship with gravity, if you like, in a way that I think is grounded and empowering. And that's a particularly powerful thing to consider, I think, between about the ages of 35 and 55, which is where my typical demographic lands.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I was going to ask you next, you know, you've been a coach for a long time. So being a master certified coach, that is just quite an accolade, isn't it? So, I mean, that's thousands and thousands of hours of coaching under your belt, and a very, very highest professional standards. What I was going to ask you is, you've clearly got a lot of experience, but is there a typical client that you have? Like, how would you describe your most frequent clients?
Well, the typical client is in the area of someone that's looking for a new relationship with gravity, in particular those that have perhaps tried at getting some lift beneath their wings, you know, and tried to find agency in their life, but then maybe tripped up at the first, second, or third hurdle, and realized, well, maybe it's not about what I was doing to get lift beneath my wings, but more about how I'm trying to resist the circumstances that are tripping me up. And so have them critically examine those. And I think that's why they tend to come late 30s towards late 40s, early 50s, because it's a time of life where we're probably more prone to ask the existential question of how, and less likely to try and reboot the system with the same operating system in hope for a different outcome. So that's typically the demographic. And I'm not sure if it would definitely there be any distinction between gender at all. More or less 50-50 in my clientele. I certainly would be more likely to work with leaders, perhaps, who are looking to find some sense of purpose and voice as a way of re-engaging a different relationship with gravity. Entrepreneurs as well. I've worked a lot in the creative industries, as you have, and so I think being able to understand the creative process can help me to help others to engage with their own creative process, and of course give voice to the message that they want to build their business around. So there's certainly a range of applications, but the requisite, I would say, to work with me is that you're ready and willing to have a much deeper look inside. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one of the companies, or one of your company, is called Thresholds of the Soul Coaching, or what you operate under that as well. So just tell us a little bit about that.
Well, two words there, both that deserve some kind of explanation. Threshold, I think, is useful. Threshold is a place of transition between one state and another. Sometimes we think of it as a threshold between dawn and day, and then day and dusk. And so that threshold is typically described as liminal, meaning it's in half light. So a threshold, a time of transition, can be a time when things are not necessarily clear. So that's what it points to, is that when people are in transition between two things, they are crossing a threshold, and it's not a hard line in the sand. It's often a time where things are foggy, ambiguous. There's a level of vulnerability because it's a liminal state. It's a state that metaphorically is like half light. So that's what thresholds stand for. And soul doesn't necessarily refer to any specific religion or wisdom tradition. It just says that soul could be, you could also use the word essence, you know, the essence of an individual. It certainly doesn't rely on any belief system in order to engage with that word, from my point of view. The same is true of, we could describe it as holding a space for people to consider their relationship to the greater whole, what you might call transpersonal. So personal is me and my, me as the center of the world, me, myself, and I. And transpersonal is that I am connected to interdependently with a bigger reality, and whether that's a bigger physical reality, the world, and the earth, for example, and the systems I'm part of, or a bigger reality that is literally transpersonal and beyond, the material realm, that's fine. It's up to the individual. So soul embraces that conversation with that bigger reality and helps the individual to define what that is. And I often find that's a critical conversation that people need to have when they're having those transition moments in their life. It's not something they can deal with transactionally, and it's often having tried to deal with it transactionally that has led them full circle to a point where they need to ask the question.
Yeah, and I think that for me has made the biggest difference in both experiencing coaching and seeing the impact of coaching is that when you're a mentor or a consultant or whatever, you're really kind of helping people with the practical, and this is what to do, this is how to do it. But when you are being coached or coaching somebody, it's really about, as you say, starting with the inside. What is inside? Deepening that awareness of the inside before forwarding the action. And that's what I learned from you at the Coactive Training Institute, just to give them a shout out, but also that's very much about being and doing. So yeah, it's wonderful. But in all the different kind of coaching that you do, because you work with leaders and you work all over the execs and all different kinds of companies, is there one thing that comes up time and time again, would you say?
That's a tough question to put. Is it one, maybe half a dozen things come up time and time again? And that also can be seasonal. We saw in the last 2 years with the pandemic and lockdown, we saw a fundamental shift that was consistent, I think, nearly in every coach's practice in the kind of conversations that coachees wanted to have. It was much more about getting present to my current reality, to the anxiety, the fear, the hope, the disappointment that was happening. It was far more cool for us to work in the present moment with the emotional realm, as the coactive model that we work with includes. And then indeed also reframing values as well. A lot of people I worked with in the early part of the pandemic said, well, I can't honor my value of freedom. It's like, so we're doing a lot of work to actually help them reframe, what does freedom mean? How is freedom still available to you? And I had that experience myself. So oftentimes there's themes that are seasonal that come, but the thing that does come time and time again, especially in the business world, is people struggling to start stopping and stop starting. That's a huge theme. So just break that down. They need to start stopping, making spaces for self-reflection, for consideration of who I am and what is important to me. And then they need to stop starting, meaning like running on empty, chasing the catch-up list, and working in short-term cycles. So it's a constant battle, and it's usually one that will be won if the company they work for is supportive of that reflective mindset. And if it's not, it can end in some kind of exit strategy for the individual.
Yeah.
Is that familiar? Is that similar to what you're seeing as well, Tracy?
But when I hear you speak about that, the stop, start, it makes me think about my own fast track. And then you've asked me, where does the idea of slow factor? But also it makes me think of I often say you can't treat yourself you can't expect to perform like a Formula One car if you treat yourself like a knackered old tractor. Is that as leaders and
same.
Business people, we have to build resilience into our and self-care and those pauses into our everyday life if we are going to be in it for the long haul and survive the kind of ups and downs of this crazy world.
Well, as an F1 fan myself, I can say it's good to remember that F1 cars spend time in the garage, and they have a huge team of technicians that ensure that they run at optimal performance all the time. So it's not about either or, is it? It's about that fast has to be in relationship to slow. And
Yeah, absolutely. So when you think about all the work you've done and the clients that you've had, what difference do you think coaching has made for people, and what do you think it makes?
Are you asking me to summarize the success of the whole coaching industry for the last 30 years?
Listen, we are celebrating International Coaching Week, so I know
yeah. And I think that's a fair question, and I feel privileged enough to have been able to have spent quite a lot of time with a couple of the founders of the coaching industry itself, who are also the founders of the coactive coaching industry, Karen and Henry Kimsey House, who in the late 80s, early 90s were formulating some of the frameworks which now are part of the guiding set of core competencies that define what coaching is. And seeing the history of it and where it emerged from, my take on it is that coaching emerged in order to answer this question, what do you really want? Because up until that point, the personal development movement and to some extent therapy had helped people really establish what they didn't really want, right? But not done such a good job at answering that bigger, more fundamental question is about what does it mean to have agency, to be the author of my life, and to, paint a picture of what I really do want. And I think that's why the coaching industry exists, because we've done a poor job at making space for that in our education system. So I think that is the success of coaching. And I think a vision that I know some other coaches hold with me is it would be great at some time in the future that the coaching industry was redundant. And why would that be the case? Is because this had become embedded in our education system. It's not difficult to develop this level of emotional and social intelligence in children to a point where they're able to relate differently, including to self, define their own values, distinguish their wants and needs, and make choices based on that, and take action and have a level of self-accountability. So I think that's the huge success of coaching, is that we are addressing that question now. And the ultimate goal is that perhaps there's a point, just like after peak oil, there's kind of peak coaching. And, but I sense that's probably 50 years probably to this point, maybe more. It will take some time to bed it into education systems significantly over generation after generation. So.
Yeah, but you're right. Along with physical education, there could be, mental education and that kind of thing. Totally. What a great point. Okay, so coming to the end of this, I just wanted to ask you what you would advise people when they are looking for a coach, bearing in mind there are so many and so many different people. So what are your top tips?
Well, I think the first one is that to get the most out of coaching, I think you have to be willing to enter into a conversation about who I am and what is possible. And that's a meatier conversation. So if you're looking to coaching as a more of a tactical thing, maybe to create a shortcut, you might get answers to those things somewhere else. So I think the first thing is really consider, are you ready to have that conversation? And in fact, and then invest in that conversation, because you know that those questions are important to you. So that's the first thing, because it is a commitment. And to get the most out of it, you've got to put something into it as well, right? So that's the first thing. And then the second thing, as I'm sure you feel the same, is that accreditation has become more and more important in our industry to distinguish what is competent coaching from what is not. And so if you are new to coaching and you're looking for a coach, I would recommend that you look for a coach that has sought an accreditation, and ideally from the International Coach Federation. That is not the only governing body, but it is the majority governing body in this self-regulated industry of coaching. So I'd look at that. And then the final thing is I'd look at what we call chemistry, is that you should have a good fit with your coach. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be alike. You might be very different. Like you and I are very different. We have probably extrovert, introvert opposites, but there's a good match based on what your needs are. And so I would certainly pay attention to ensuring that you find that there's some synergy, some click with your coach. You don't have to like them, be their best friend. That's not what it's about. It's about feeling like you feel empowered by the space that they create. So make sure you feel like that on the first meeting. Trust your instincts there.
Those are fantastic top tips. Thank you so much. So as we wrap up, Nick, is there anything else you would like to say to celebrate International Coaching Week? That's my first question.
That I'm immensely grateful to work in this industry. It's just a privilege, both to train coaching skills to business leaders and to new coaches, and to see the ripple effect that they make. And if you could indulge with a minute, I'll tell a little anecdote just that says why I am so grateful and privileged. Is that sadly, and it happens, a client of mine passed away about a year ago, and I was honored to be invited to their virtual funeral. And I arrive and there's about 200 people on Zoom, and there's a pastor there, and we sang and we prayed. It was a beautiful thing. And then the family very generously were inviting anyone who wanted to speak. And now I didn't speak because my relationship was a few degrees away, but I listened to, I think, about 40 people talk about this person, from who were all very close to them, family or friend. And every single one of them, the story they told about this person related to coaching, and they did not call it coaching. They just said, well, this person always used to listen in a different way. This person used to remind me of who I was at my best. This person used to challenge me to stretch. They would describe things that we know as coaching without calling it coaching. And this person had had such a huge ripple effect on all these different lives, just by reminding these people who they were, or giving them a space to consider who they were at their best. And that's what makes me feel grateful to be part of this wonderful industry, is because we can create significant ripple effects by just a few conversations. So
yeah, oh, that's beautiful. That's so powerful. I mean, yeah, wow. Thank you, Nick. That's wonderful. Now, listen, if people are watching this and think, I want to find out more, I want to check out working with Nick, he's the one for me, how should they find you?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to say that. They definitely should check out my website, which is simply thresholdsofthesoul.com. That's it. And it's thresholds plural. It's not threshold, it's thresholdsofthesoul.com. And they should definitely look at the site and read the copy, because that describes this focus that I have about establishing a new relationship with gravity. So it will be important, if you feel curious about working with me, to read that copy, just to be 100% sure that you want to get in touch for the next conversation, because there are different times in life where perhaps I'm not the best coach for you, and I would want to optimize your experience. So take a look at the website, and if you feel like something clicks from the copy there, I would be really happy to hear from you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nick. And I want to say a big thank you to you as well. I lucked out having you as one of my first tutors when I studied.
It was fun, huh?
Coach. It was fantastic. And
I remember that first class.
And I'm grateful for all the coaching that you have given me over the last few years. And so thank you very much.
You're so welcome. And I'm grateful for what you're doing in publicizing coaching in such a assertive, positive, optimistic, and affirming way. I shouldn't expect anything less from someone with a background in the broadcast media, that you bring a certain edge to the way that you present experiences like this. So thank you, and more power to that. I look forward to what's next.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Yes, I want to spread the word and get it out there, because I do really passionately believe in how powerful and how positive the impact can be. So, okay, so thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining us as we celebrate International Coaching Week. And I will see you tomorrow for another wonderful, an interview with another wonderful coach. Thank you.
Look forward to